Thundergrunt.
Hey guys,
Hey, Bob.
Bob.
introduce yourselves.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant.
I am Jamie Nash, screenwriter and podcaster.
That's right.
And I am Bob Rose. I'm an independent filmmaker, a podcaster, and a friend to all dogs.
A wonderful man.
Well, wonderful man, but I think dogs like me a lot. And
Very
that's-
special friend.
Yeah, right. Don't say it like that. That's not this podcast, sir.
It's
Anyway,
a different topic.
So today I feel like this is something that I think I brought up first because we hadn't done it yet. I can't remember.
I think so.
Just the genre. We're going to talk about a comedy.
I know. It's fun.
Yes, and it's something that we kind of we haven't done yet on this show at all.
Most of the stuff that we've been covering is pretty serious.
Pretty well. It's action, fantasy based usually. So we're going to talk about. I would say, would you could easily consider a modern classic,
Yeah.
right? I mean, this is a
definitely.
modern classic. Bridesmaids.
Yeah.
Paul Feig's Bridesmaids.
I couldn't believe it was 7 years old. It doesn't feel like that. It still feels like contemporary.
It's still very much in the now.
Yeah.
And I remember when it was announced, it was kind of. I mean, it's going to be derided because this world is terrible, but it was like, oh, it's a female hangover. Which remember that? Do you remember all the backlash?
Yeah.
Before. Like Ghostbusters and everything
Right,
and all that.
right.
But the backlash to this movie was it's a female hangover. It's nothing, And then it turned out
Yeah.
it's not
to
that.
be
Number one, it's not that.
more heralded than the other one.
I think it is. Also, there's no awful Bridesmaids 2 and 3.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
yeah. And this kind of gave rise to Paul Feig
That's true.
and
It did. It did. It's
what's the box
It's
office,
skyrocketed.
Jamie? Let's talk about
Would you
how
say-
successful this blockbuster was.
well, let me tell you, it made $50 million in China.
Right.
That's all that matters anymore.
So Bridesmaids was a surprise hit, a surprise summer hit. I don't know where it landed for the year, but it totaled $288 million worldwide.
Wow.
So not quite Avengers money,
yeah.
but for
Jumanji
maybe,
2 money.
But yeah,
Or
it's-
anything. But
exactly. But for 2011, off of a $32 million budget,
Yeah.
That's a pretty big hit for the studio.
Yeah, definitely.
pretty big. And what was really interesting about it too was it was written by Kristen Wiig, who we knew from SNL,
SNL.
Mhm.
Right, yeah.
and Annie Mumolo, which I guess she's a groundling. Was she in?
All I remember is that they were friends before SNL.
That's
I'm
okay.
assuming she came from
And
some
the lead
kind of
character's name is Annie, so that's
yeah.
interesting.
It's it was like a personal story with them.
Personal, okay.
And isn't the story that Judd Apatow
That's right.
kind of heralded them to write your script and I'll produce it
so
type?
Judd Apatow, after
Cool.
Freaks and
Yeah.
Geeks, and Paul Feig was Freaks and Geeks, the creator as well.
He's also a character actor from the 80s and 90s. He was in Heavyweights. He's in Ski Patrol. Oh, I remember Paul Feig. I love Paul Feig.
So Apatow kind of became this mentor figure for a lot of the comedians in Hollywood. I knew Superbad was written under his tutelage. I think they wrote it in high school and then rewrote it.
Rewrote it for
They wanted
the-
to see if they could write a movie. and
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
super bad. Yeah.
I think Jason Segel, was it Knocked Up or Forgetting Sarah Marshall or both? I think.
Pretty
maybe
sure
both.
it was Sarah Marshall.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But they were kind of under Apatow's mentorship. And in this movie, he said to Kristen Wiig, he said, hey, let's do something together. You write it, I'll produce it.
Nice.
And this is the movie that came out of that query.
Yeah, wow.
I mean, thank God.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's. I mean, if you think of Judd Apatow, the Judd Apatow brand, I guess this fits under that.
Yeah,
This
definitely.
absolutely
Yeah,
fits under
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I would say that this is definitely top 3.
It's definitely a nice
Top
companion
3,
to 40-Year-Old Virgin.
Yeah, which he directed. I mean, I'm thinking about all the everything he produced.
Yeah.
And since like the 40-year-old version boom.
Yeah.
I would say this was in like top 3, at least definitely top 5.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
The interesting thing, I've heard a lot of interviews, not necessarily their interview. I didn't hear this piece of advice, but this is already in the advice column, I guess. But to Jason Segel, to Seth Rogen, all these other people, the advice he would always give them was write the non-comedic version first. Come up with the dramatic version. And don't worry about the jokes, because he said all these comedians would get so stuck in the jokes, and they said,
so interesting.
Yeah, and it was like that's what you excel in. You'll figure that part out, but make sure everything else works.
It makes sense because he always Judd Apatow always kind of runs off that James L. Brooks type of movie, and he just he always said he makes a James L. Brooks movie, and then he just adds the jokes. That's his like, and if you watch his movies,
it feels like
it's
that.
Absolutely, what he's doing.
Yeah, because it's funny. It made me think of when we were talking about on the It podcast about what's a horror movie and what's there's people who go, okay, so in rewatching this, it had been a while. It's way more dramatic than I remembered.
Absolutely,
and it's way more serious in its empathy for your characters, which is not typical for a comedy. Like, you don't really get into the nitty-gritty deep details of a character.
If you
which we
remove,
can talk about later.
If you remove the comedy, this is like an indie Sundance darling.
Yeah,
right.
You know what I mean? It doesn't take much to change it into that.
So when you say these things, that's news to me, and that makes sense.
Yeah,
that informs why it feels that way. Because you could take out the jokes, and it would be a great drama.
When I first started screenwriting, I thought I was going to be the next Farley brother solo. I was going to be the lone Farley brother.
Right.
So you were interested in comedy mainly.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And it took me a little while to figure this out, but
the lovely Molly guy talks about comedy.
No, my first probably 10 screenplays were trying to be the Farley brothers. That's what I was trying to do.
Right.
And what I soon realized, I valued my scripts. Would I be the funniest script? Would somebody read it and laugh the most at my jokes? And what I learned was that Hollywood and most people didn't value that. You needed all those other things that all screenplays have. You needed all the beats, all the characters, all the character arc, all the heart. So I would have been probably pretty good if you put me on Scary Movie 7.
Oh, yeah, because it's all gags.
It's all gags.
It's all gags, right.
And that's one type of comedy. And I would have been awesome at that. In fact, I wrote my own, version similar to that. And I was good at that. But yeah, it took me a little while to figure out that these movies, while funny and some of them hilarious, and like this movie has some of the greatest laugh out loud scenes. I bet that wedding scene, or I'm sorry, the wedding gown scene goes right up there.
Right.
In a hit list of top 10 funniest scenes of all time.
It's so good.
It's like you say, a Sundance drama.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. And so
it totally is. I if anything, I rewatched this actually twice when you guys said it, because when we first decided, I watched it, and then I actually watched it last night right before we recorded, and also because I just love
it's
the
a great movie.
It's a great movie. Right, and if anything, it's like it comes off to me as just this like this wonderful love story, but not between her and the cop. It's between two best friends. The movie is an absolutely beautiful love story between
two friends,
two best friends. Yeah,
I like that take on it.
Yeah, I mean, if I had one criticism, it would be that it doesn't end with the two of them. Mm-hmm. It ends with her and the cop. But then I realized that, like, kind of as maybe even a meta commentary a little bit, like, he's more of a reward in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
it's kind of a play on the sexism of other movies of its ilk.
Yeah, that's
you know
interesting.
what I mean? The cop is what she gets for kind of self-actualizing and realizing her place and in the universe and with her friends and everything,
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Does
yeah,
that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Because her relationship with my Rudolph.
I hadn't really thought about it like Get the Guy. It's not really about Get the Guy.
No,
That's
it's about
like
her. It's 100% about her.
Yeah.
And it's about her and her story with my Rudolph too. I mean, it's her wedding. Yeah. It's the two of them, and the whole thing is about how she feels jilted by another woman, right? I mean, is that not what the movie is?
Yeah, well, it's also about her blaming everybody else for her problems, that all of the things that are going wrong are not her fault. And then the mindset shifts over the course of the story, and she starts actually saying out loud to the various people in her life, I did this. This is my fault. You know, in all the moments in the last, you know, when she's in the car and she's they're trying to get the cop to pay attention to them.
Right, yeah.
And she says, I don't think that the food poisoned us, and she's like, no, it totally did. It totally did. I
It's like
shit
the
my
moment-
pants.
yeah, right.
That's my fault.
Yeah, so watching it for this podcast the whole time, like structurally and like Chekhov's gun, I was just watching it because I was kind of figuring that an improv comedy would have a lot of scenes where I was like, well, that's just there to be a gag, like you're saying, Jamie.
Yeah.
And the only thing that stood out to me was the roommates, was her roommates. Because they kind of had their own little like joke world that kind of doesn't interact with the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
You know, and at first I was like, yeah, they could probably be completely cut. But then it got to the end when they kick her out right at like I want to say Dark Knight of the Soul part of the movie.
Yeah.
They kick her out when everything's down. They're like,
Yeah.
we think you should leave.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? It actually works.
It has
I
purpose.
was like, even the roommates, the one thing where I was like, kind of doesn't have a purpose with the structure of the script. I was like, no, it does. It does. It's a good joke. It's funny. And it's like they establish those characters to kick her out right when the cars are down. You know?
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah.
I was trying to figure out also, and this goes to the roommates a little bit. When I was watching it this time, I was like, what makes this funny? You know, what is the engine to make this funny? And what I kept coming back to, it's really a character-driven funny.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Um,
yeah.
And I guess
It's not gags.
Yeah,
really.
it's not gags at all.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
the shitting and
There's-
stuff.
there's
but
some-
There's
stuff
a
like that.
couple,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's
and
not gag based overall. Yeah,
I've had this conversation. I'm a big fan of Curb, so Curb's like one of my favorite.
you're
things.
looking at one of the world's greatest fans
Okay.
of Curb. So
I'm not familiar with Curb.
Curb Your
Curb
Enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm.
Oh,
yeah.
Larry David.
Yeah.
Uh,
Larry
so-
David's a hero.
So I have friends that'll actually say to me, they'll say, I don't really like Curb. It's got that cringe humor.
Mm-hmm.
But when I watched this, that was going through my head.
That's all this is.
This has cringe humor, but I know the same people that don't like that like this, and I'm not
Mhm.
exactly sure why, except maybe that has a label of cringe humor. But in this movie, I mean, Kristen Wiig's character. So here's my take. I'll just dive in.
Go
on
for
my
Do
it.
it.
Go for it. We want
So-
this.
Let's
yeah.
go.
So my take on what makes this movie funny is I think thematically, I had a hard time figuring out the exact theme of this movie because it goes around. I don't know if you have any
I
thoughts.
did not.
Okay,
I
so
was
here,
gonna bounce off of you.
here's one I kind of came up with.
I got ideas, but I want to hear what you
Yeah,
say.
I think it was her. She has this idealism sort of thing, this perfection, this perfect life,
Mhm.
the being the perfect thing, and she's trying to have people believe that's what she is or make the world that thing. And when somebody comes along like the cop that's not as hot as John Hamm or
Yep.
Rich or anything, she kind of discounts that at first,
Yeah.
even though that's what's good for her.
Yeah.
Instead, she's more like into John Hamm.
Yeah.
Or in the example of when she starts having this competition, this bridesmaids competition, she has to top the perfect person that's become her nemesis.
Mhm.
Instead of just accepting what she is and being, compromising, she's always trying to fake it. She's
Yeah.
always trying to fake it till she makes her be as good or rise to the challenge. And anyway, so I think a lot of the comedy comes from her, even the classic scene, the gown scene. Like she's sweating and she's pretending like
But
she's not
It's also
sick.
directly her
perfection.
fault for being who she is.
It is.
I mean,
It's-
even
it's-
in that scene, they say like she's really good at choosing these weird restaurants.
right.
Yeah.
She did something that's 100% her, and they all
Yeah.
paid for it.
With
Yeah,
heart.
yeah.
They
Yeah.
all paid for it. Yeah, it was an honest thing, and she's like, "That was just me being me, and I ruined everything."
Yeah. And then
You know?
she even can't admit to it at that point until the
Yeah.
end. And then she
Can I
finally
add
cops
one
to it.
something to
Do
what
it.
Jamie's saying? Because I think what you're saying is very similar to how I view this movie. I view this movie as weirdly kind of a commentary on romantic comedies. Because this does everything right that most romantic comedies of the aughts and the 90s kind of do wrong, where the men barely speak.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy that's in the wedding that the movie's about, played by Tim Heidecker, He doesn't have a
He
line.
has no single line.
He is a non-entity.
I love that.
I love it. I absolutely love
that.
it. Yeah, I absolutely love it. And what you're saying about her character, Jamie, the way she's written is she wants that romantic comedy life and thinks that's what people's lives are supposed to be. And she looks around and the people who she sees that have that, she thinks I'm a failure because I don't. And it's like this, it's a movie that's like a commentary on that direct thing while also being kind of a romantic comedy.
No, I would
like,
say that's I said idealism, but I think she wants that romantic notion of life.
Right.
Yeah.
Not even of romance, but of life in general, of friendship, of a business, of everything. Right. She wants that romantic notion. There's a great line in there too that really should speak to all of us writers. And I again, my memory is killing me for this. It was something along the lines of, just because you don't make money from it doesn't mean you're not good at it.
Oh man,
yeah, that's good
great.
For all artists.
Good for all artists.
Man.
When the cop says it to her, and I think that's sort of part of it too. Like there's a certain scorecard that she cares about.
I like
and
that
she
phrase,
needs to
scorecard.
There's a scorecard that she has, but she's not looking at the right scorecard. And by the end of it, she gets the right scorecard.
And the movie does such a good job of drip feeding. Like she views, I forget the character's name, Rose.
Helen.
Yeah, it's Helen. Right?
Yeah.
The woman from all the horror movies.
Neighbors.
Yeah, right. Yeah. She views her as
Neighbors
perfect.
Is a horror movie.
With a few tweaks, it could be.
I love Neighbors and Neighbors too.
Yeah. What was I saying? She views her as perfect, but the movie drip feeds you little ounces throughout the whole thing where she's actually miserable, and alone, and everyone hates her. You know what I mean? And it kind of perfectly comes to a head. The movie does a great job of that.
It's interesting that you say that because now I see them more as that protagonist-antagonist model works really well when you put it that way. That Kristen Wiig is seeking perfection, and then Helen is projecting perfection,
handing out puppies.
Yeah, and so like that works really well as an attack on her.
Honestly, I think that might be my biggest laugh in the movie.
Honestly, that's mine.
But she's like, she doesn't get a party favor. They don't say puppy. Maya Rudolph doesn't say puppy as best.
Yeah. So we haven't talked about like what's different about writing comedy, and something you said triggered. I didn't really realize that it was kind of a commentary on the romantic comedy.
Yeah, I think it's so well written and buried in there that it's not a blunt. It's not like They Live or something. It's not like there it is. It's just if you look at the pieces and you see, well, here's what those movies are. Here's what one of the I don't know, like 27 Dresses or points is something that's just like the most cliche thing you could. It's kind of oddly, I would say this is the antithesis to me of Trainwreck, which I don't.
Interesting.
I do not like Trainwreck that much.
Trainwreck falls way more in line with the old get the guy, get the girl.
To me, Trainwreck does fall in that line, and it's produced by Apatow, which is the only reason I brought it up.
And kind of the same scenario where he said, "Write this, and I'll produce it."
It's the same scenario, right? Yeah. And we're not going to talk about Trainwreck, but just this movie goes against all those tropes in a very smart, very subtle way.
No, and I hadn't thought of it that way.
John Cena is just like John Hamm.
I mean, it's not that far off.
Kind of,
it's not that far off.
But so a lot of comedy is like an attack against something, like satire,
or satire, or a commentary,
right?
Yeah, what have
and so I had viewed this as an attack on Bridesmaids, and that whole wedding ceremonial thing, and the whole movie being an attack on like how.
But it's really not.
But no, when you put it that way, it's like an attack. It's like a satire of romantic comedies.
Yeah. It doesn't really. I don't think it really satirizes the actual experience of Bridesmaids. That being a bridesmaid.
I mean, there's all the things: the bachelorette party, the engagement party, the rehearsal.
I think it can work both ways because they're both romantic notions.
They are.
Yeah.
And I think a good.
I don't think it's insulting wedding culture or anything.
I think it is
a little bit.
I think in a great way.
I think it's kind of saying
commentating on it.
Don't worry about things don't have to be perfect and the perfect wedding and all that. But that first scene not the first scene, but the first kind of challenge scene where Helen gets up and gives the speech, and then she kind of slides in. Kristen Wiig slides in there and gives her own. It kind of shows you like Helen's speech is the perfect speech. It's
Right.
the tearjerker speech. It's the one in the serious version, in the Katherine Heigl version,
Right.
that we'd be weeping in the audience.
Yeah.
At least Jimmy would. I wouldn't. I'm thinking.
And that scene would end after she did it.
It would end
Yeah.
after she did that.
But then you got Kristen Wiig get up there and I'll take the mic back. Thank you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It keeps going
Yeah.
to where it's painful.
But you're right. That kind of even that works both ways. That is kind of a commentary on both romantic comedies, but also the wedding culture.
It's how people may envision their wedding going.
Yeah.
Their whatever that was, that party, the engagement party.
Yeah,
or
the
something.
engagement. That was the engagement part.
Helen's
yeah.
how they want it to go. Kristen Wiig is how it might
How
Probably will go.
Yeah, right.
And
Right.
that's a comedy technique, back in my years of trying to be a Farley brother. I kind of fell upon, because I used to try to make everything crazy. This was one of the problems I had.
Yeah.
So I always say you almost get a choice. You can either have crazy characters or crazy world. And I think this has that romantic comedy world. And then we're throwing Kristen Wiig and some of the other characters in, like a time bomb, into this to mess everything up. They're the disruptor.
Okay.
They're gonna screw up the whole thing by just tossing her
This
in there.
romantic
with all
comedy
To
her-
go
world.
along with that, I would say like in another worse, more cliche movie, Melissa McCarthy would have come off just as, fat person fall down, go boom, funny. But then she's given like probably the most poignant scene in the movie to the main character, which is
Fight.
when she. Well, yeah, when she's like, when she comes with the dogs to the house, and the principal's like, "Hey, I'm your friend.
Yeah.
Why don't you realize you're not alone
Yeah.
and stop crying
Yeah.
and just get up, get back into it." And it's like they made that character really important,
Yeah.
and she's really amazingly funny. I'm a huge Melissa McCarthy fan,
Me too.
but she's not just like scene dressing comedy.
Agreed.
She's
Yeah.
not there for just gags.
Yeah, absolutely.
You
In fact, I think she's very thematic.
Yeah, me too.
No,
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
I think she's the one that is kind of over all this romantic bullshit to an extent.
Yeah.
And so she can see through it.
She's like more mature than everyone else in the
She
movie.
insults the
Yeah.
groom at every opportunity. My brother's a piece of shit.
Right.
And but of course, she's cool enough to take advantage of taking 10 puppies too. She gets it. She's like, "Is this crazy? I'm taking 10 puppies."
No, she comes off as more advanced.
Yeah,
somehow.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And she says she works for the government. Right. But I'm just saying, in another movie, she would have been the funny fat friend
Right.
that doesn't have this like moment.
Yeah.
Or these
Once
moments.
again,
Subverting
comment
that.
of the romantic comedy
Exactly.
world that you just brought up.
Mhm.
That's perfect. Yeah. I hadn't looked at it at either of what you're saying. And I love both of these takes.
I feel like you haven't. What did you feel like it was? You felt like it was just a commentary on
Bridesmaids, on
wedding culture.
on wedding culture. I thought it was like a straight up attack on wedding culture, on what
The movie-
specifically female
I
wedding
think
culture.
wedding culture is informed by these movies
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think it goes hand in
Absolutely.
hand.
Yeah.
and.
But I mean, as far as like every set piece is like the fitting, it's like fuck your fitting, fuck your rehearsal dinner,
Right.
fuck your big bridal shower. Like it's like a big fuck you to every single thing that like women get excited about. Stereotypically, when a wedding is
Do you know how I think this movie's so well
in a
written.
great way? I'm saying
It's so well written. It's got this moment between Kristen Wiig and Maya Rudolph in the bedroom after she was missing for a while. You remember that?
Yeah.
And there's this moment where Maya Rudolph goes, "I'm the one that's supposed to have been insane, and you took it all from me."
Yeah.
So it's a Bridezilla movie,
Mhm.
but the bride isn't
The
the one
bride
who is
isn't
the
the
Bridezilla.
Zilla. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like even on that level, it's like
Yeah.
really smart,
Yeah.
Like it's like just the fact that she was thrown into this really important life moment of her friend getting married, she even screws that up.
What?
For everyone, yeah.
One thing that you brought up, it reminded me of. I heard when they first wrote the script, they wrote it in like 5 days. They wrote the script in 5 days.
Wow.
That's
And
really impressive.
That's the headline. But then you hear it took them like 5 years to rewrite.
Okay.
So it wasn't
probably
like,
also get greenlit.
yeah. And
Wow.
and my understanding was the 5-day version was mostly gags.
Okay.
Like they wrote the gag version. And much like we saw in Mission Impossible Fallout, you can almost see that when they came up with this, they probably went to a checklist
Of
of
the-
set pieces.
Yeah.
You know, the engagement party. Yeah, we can have engagement.
We gotta
Wait,
have
they
it.
can all go to
Yep.
Vegas.
Yeah.
Checkbox.
Yep.
Oh, the wedding ceremony. Checkbox.
And that's premise delivery.
The rehearsal dinner. Checkbox. And they have all these set pieces, much like Tom Cruise would show up and say, "I'm jumping out of a helicopter."
Right.
They had
Yeah.
those, and then they probably wrote to those and connected those dots with them.
How
so
wonderful
they made
is
it
it?
sure that
How
they,
wonderful is it to write and advertise a set piece like going to Vegas, and then literally have the main character ruin it for the audience?
Yeah, I love that.
They don't. You know what I
Reversal of
mean? You know what I mean? Because like
expectation.
I feel like the advertising all
Yeah.
said this is the Hangover with women, and then it was like, oh no,
Right.
like she's got so many.
We're not
problems.
going there.
No, she
Yeah.
literally ruins it for the audience. You don't see it.
Yeah.
Right.
They're sitting
Yeah.
in a van with a bunch of
Yeah.
Can
we talk about structure a little bit? I think.
Well, so
Is that? Oh,
I
sorry.
didn't have any. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is, even though this has a tight structure, I don't think comedies need a tight structure. It's like the one genre where I think structure doesn't matter as long as you have a goal, and occasionally the goal comes up again, and then in the end the goal is addressed. I think you can have
As long as the scenes have goals too.
right.
Still,
Yeah, they have
I mean,
their
still,
own construction. But what I'm
generally,
saying
yeah.
I
is
think
like.
Judd Apatow would disagree with you.
Well, so
yeah.
that's a very unique thing to his movies. It's like really interesting that you pointed out, because I was expecting, like you said, when you watched the you were like, oh, even the apartment scenes with the brother and sister end up mattering. You know, I was expecting
Because at the
during
beginning
the
they
rewatch,
kind of just seem like, okay, here's Rebel Wilson. She's funny if you put a camera on her.
yeah,
But I was like, why is this?
it feels like
here?
it's gonna go nowhere.
But then it has the point. Then
Yeah.
it justifies it.
So
you
with
know?
this movie, I think it does have a tight structure, but I just think comedy in general, like the audience forgives. Like I think comedies, one of the things I wanted to mention is comedies can break the one coincidence rule, right? We've got this thing, we'll forgive one coincidence in the movie, but with comedies, like everything could be, you could have like,
I think it depends on the comedy.
okay,
too.
you think it
You know,
depends on
It also it depends on tone a
like
lot.
Yeah.
like Wayne's World could have a
the
million coincidences.
right? It doesn't matter.
I feel like we bring up
yeah.
Wayne's World. We should probably do Wayne's World one day. We bring it up all the time. It's a very amazingly well written
It's
comedy.
so good.
One day in the future, maybe.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Harold and Kumar could have
Yeah.
a million. I'm just
Yeah.
moving away
Harold
from
and
Wayne's World
Kumar.
to
Yeah.
two other funny guys. Bill and Ted. No, I'm just no, that's not-
But you're right. That's tone though, right? Like it
It's
depends
tone.
on the tone of the comedy. Whereas if you point to like something like a Judd Apatow movie,
Yeah.
they are that James L. Brooks.
Yeah.
Then again, Seth Rogen has pushed that. I mean, Pineapple Express. Then you go even crazier. This Is the End,
yeah.
where it's like the tone is just we'll take
Yeah.
anything. Just go for it. As long as the laugh is there, it fills in that hole that you
right.
don't- no one's gonna ask about this. Just fill in that hole with laughter.
I'd
Yeah.
say though, some of some of Apatow's better works,
Yeah.
which I consider Knocked Up, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Forgetting Sarah Marshall. When I say Apatow, the Apatow family, I guess.
It's funny because my favorite movies that he's written aren't any of these movies. It'd be like Heavyweights and Cable Guy, honestly.
Okay.
I know. I'm weird.
I like both of them.
Yeah.
But those
Celtic
movies,
Pride.
those movies have less. They're more like this, that they have less. You can't throw coincidence and anarchy in there.
Right.
They're pretty bulletproof in regards
Yeah.
to 3-act
Structurally
They have
tight.
character arcs.
Yeah.
They have
yeah.
set up payoffs. They're pretty much.
Yeah.
This
Arch plots.
outside of the outrageous element of this movie, which is definitely a product of when it came out and when it was being made, it kind of feels like a late 70s like romantic kind of
Yeah.
off Broadway show that was turned into a movie. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It has an
It
element.
makes no sense.
Okay, sorry. Well, I'm sorry.
So Jamie, let me
I don't
ask
know.
so I want to ask you as a working screenwriter.
Okay.
Do you think that now the demand from the audience is to be like this, where everything, like the structure matters? Do you think that audiences want this more so than the screwball nothing like, because I feel like
do they want Porky's or they want this?
that's what I'm
you know what well,
yeah.
yeah, like
what I mean is,
So one
to your
term,
point,
and I don't write. I'm not. I realized I was not going to be the next Farley brother, the third Farley brother. So
never say never, Jamie.
there's still time. So I don't see scripts with the outrageous, Caddyshack or something
Yeah.
sell anymore. it is more things like this. And I would point to horror. What do they always say they want from horror, from screenwriters, Hollywood? They always want elevated horror.
Right.
I almost get the feeling that's what we're talking about with comedy.
And that's what my question
Elevated
was. You
comedy.
think that
Whatever that means.
where the direction we're in and headed, continuing to be in, is the elevated, meaning like characters need arcs, structure needs to be tight, it needs to be thematically resonant, all of these things.
It's not all gags and kills.
Right. And
Yeah.
And because I think a lot of successful comedies in the past don't share any of that. Like, it doesn't matter,
Well,
right? But what you're saying, like, when you think about it, yeah.
I would add to, I think we've talked about this, is like a lot of those outrageous comedies, they're not taking the slice of life stuff, whereas the Bridesmaids is this is something that most people experience.
Yeah, that's what
You know
I
what I
mean.
mean?
I mean,
Like,
there's major empathy with the characters
right?
in this
And
movie.
some of the bigger outrageous movies we all grew up with are stuff that I never in my life was around or
Well,
in any of that.
experienced,
Yeah,
right.
like Caddyshack's. I don't know any
but
of that.
you
in
also
life.
never are never.
But you
given,
lived Animal House.
Yeah, right.
But
right.
in those movies, you're never given a chance to empathize deeply with the struggles of the characters. You know, it's very like one dimensional. Like
It's funny. I watched Stripes the other day. I rewatched it. Stripes actually has a pretty dramatic core in its own weird
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
way. I was surprised.
Very weird structure and
Yeah.
Stripes. Yeah,
At the-
right.
When I was a kid, I thought it was the most hilarious movie ever, and I probably didn't pay attention to any of that. But you could almost take the jokes out, and it would almost
Interesting.
work. And that's the Apatow test: is take the jokes
the
out. and will it
Apatow
work?
Does it
test.
work?
Yeah.
And with that, I would say this 100%.
Oh yeah,
does.
this is because one thing I wanted to talk about, I wanted to discuss with you guys, and that's where I started to talk about it when I said the horror, what is horror argument, and what is comedy argument with this. It's definitely a comedy. I think it's a comedy, and I think it's based on intent. Is it intending to be funny?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but
Right.
like so you know me with my numbers. The last 20 minutes of this movie, after the car, where
Yep.
that sequence, there are only 4 attempts in 20 minutes for a laugh. There's almost no laughs in the last 20 minutes of this movie. It shifts completely to the drama, and the laughs that are there are even small. And what I mean is, like, the intent isn't even there in the last 20 minutes of this movie to make you laugh. And
It earned it.
so you're saying, but
It earned the patience.
do you think that that's the right way to go? Wouldn't you think a comedy should have its best laughs in the end? You know, I was really surprised in the rewatch. I was like, this isn't even trying to be funny. It's like trying to be serious for like the last 20 minutes.
I want to go back to what Jamie said. It's a tonal thing. You
Yeah.
know, if you're like, depends if you're a Wayne's World or a Bo Rat even or something.
Yeah.
It's just out there. You end on shooting the load.
Yeah.
With something like this, it's like a well-written, well-rounded movie with
it fits
great
the
characters.
piece.
It just fits. I think that everyone, by the time you get to the scene where they make up, the two of them, you
Yeah.
want that so bad.
Yeah.
You want that for Kristen Wiig. You don't need the laugh anymore,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
It's,
Yeah.
it's almost like horror sometimes has a problem in that the third act's evolved into action.
Right.
It's no longer horror.
It's not scary.
And I think that's maybe what happens here is, okay, it's time. The ball has been so tightly wound.
From a laughing standpoint.
We have to release that,
Okay.
that tension,
Okay.
And there's a way you can do it in humor.
Yeah.
But also, I agree. I think in this movie in particular, we bought in. We're bought in.
Yeah.
So we're ready to just
Yeah.
settle all accounts and go home. So
Okay.
I think that is.
I wanted to hear both of your takes on that. It was just surprising to me that this didn't.
Yeah, it
have-
doesn't
yeah.
end on the big one.
Yeah.
I mean, it ends with a laugh.
It does end with a
It
laugh.
ends with-
but,
I think, but it ends big, maybe not with a big laugh.
yeah.
The Wilson Phillips reveal is a nice callback.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
It's like, it's
and
a pleasant
the
laugh.
lyrics
Yeah.
of the song are very like
It's perfect.
comment on the story.
I think
Yeah.
a good ending is more important than a funny ending, and I say that
With
as
comedy
somebody.
season.
Yeah, and comedy's like my favorite. Obviously, my favorite genre. You guys know me.
Yeah, I
and
know.
everything.
That's why I wanted to ask you about
No,
this.
I think a good ending is more important than a funny one.
Mhm.
In most cases, unless you're making Scary Movie 7
Yeah.
or whatever, like that's where the joke matters.
Right.
But this is a movie about characters.
Okay. Yeah.
This is a movie about Kristen Wiig,
I agree.
Yeah, and it sells you on that. I mean, and it's also I would say maybe as far as like laugh out loud or outrageous moments, we're talking about like maybe 3 or 4.
Yeah,
and that's enough, and you can still be a real tangible movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're not shooting for that every scene, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the comedy, especially, we talked about it before, that screenwriting is psychology translated into behavior, you know?
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's where the bulk of this comedy comes from is Kristen Wiig's character will take it to the extreme with her behaviors.
Yeah.
Like most people wouldn't take it to that extreme.
Most people wouldn't like punch the cookie and try to damage all the food. And
if you
stuff.
So if you take that back, if you reel her character back, then it becomes the non-comedy, the more grounded version. If you take it to extremes, we're in the comedy.
The extremes,
version. Yeah. So, and then I think by the end,
they did what the audience was thinking if they were in that situation.
That's right.
Yeah.
I wish that I could go nuts right now.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna bite my tongue.
Yeah. So, I think that's what happens. And then by the end, maybe that's part of the reason that happens is she's a little bit more coming down off her nuttiness.
She's not going to be the zany character anymore.
Yeah. So she can't take it to those extremes because almost all the comedy is rooted with her going to some extreme or making some crazy decision that most people would make. And by then she's kind of healed herself.
That's a good point.
Here, I'll ask you guys something, because this is something that I would also maybe have a criticism of. Like, the movie is called Bridesmaids, so technically speaking, it's pointing to all of the bridesmaids. Now, some of the other bridesmaids have an arc that's kind of never finished. Yeah. I forget.
I don't think that matters.
I don't think it matters, but it's there.
Yeah.
It's not there. You got, one who is in kind of a newlywed marriage that is not. She's having a bad sex life with her husband, and she's kind of being mentored by the other one who has too many kids, and her marriage is just old hat and boring, and they do have that moment on the plane, but that never, it ends there. They kind of get drunk together and admit everything, but I noticed this time around watching it, I was like, that doesn't really resolve itself. It just kind of goes away. That could be an editing thing too.
Maybe there was some material.
You think that was written in there somewhere that they had?
No, I don't.
They had an ending there.
I didn't do a deep dive into it, but I was wondering if these characters would fall into that thing we talked about before, that doubter, believer, deflector.
Oh, that's
good.
Interesting.
I was wondering. I didn't do the deep dive. I got lazy.
I didn't do the deep dive. What I did the deep dive on is something that I learned this from McKee.
Describe what McKee is again.
Robert McKee, and I don't recommend his stuff to everybody because it's like a little bit too what's the word I'm looking for?
Professorial.
Yes, it's very like stuffy and not easily digestible. But he at one point had a
he's a big fan of the podcast.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob, for listening.
No, I love him. I think he's awesome. So I do not. Okay, so like one thing he talks about when he talks about comedy is that it's the comedy should be based around a character's blind obsession. And so I went through and I broke down what could, and he talks about like in a sitcom, these characters have they usually have 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And the more blind obsessions a character has, the more potential for comedy there is, because you can just jump on these things, right? But if you get too many, then you're like, this character's absolutely ridiculous, and I don't find it funny because I find them too ridiculous, right? So I wanted to see if it tracked well with this movie, and it really does. So you talked on all this. You've been talking about Annie's stuff. Perfectly lines up with blind obsessions. She is obsessed with going to the extreme to prove that she's a closer friend to Lillian, and that informs like so much of the comedy. She is obsessed with spending as little amount of money as possible, which is responsible for like 10 jokes in the movie.
Yeah, yep.
What about this one, the tag? And like you said, I hadn't hit on this, but the perfection thing is that she really is obsessed with like perfection, what she thinks is perfect, right? Helen is hers are 3 things: is her over the top parties, so everything with her is over the top, and all the comedy is based on that. And she's better than everybody else, right? She believes she's better.
She has to be the most.
She has to be the better.
Anything.
It's not just over the top, but she's better. I'm better than you. I'm prettier than you. And a lot of her comedy is based on that. And then her third one is proving that she's a closer friend to Lillian than Annie. So all those things, if you go back and watch the movie, she is like blind to all of these things, and all the comedy with her is based on that. Lillian, I was like, this is going to be tough because Maya Rudolph's character feels like she's just kind of there. But if you really like look for what is her like kind of controlling thing, it's she tries to please everyone. She wants everybody to be happy. And she's like, every scene, the thing that it comes back to is she's like, as long as you're happy, you know, I'll do whatever. I'll go with whatever.
She's oddly, I think, in the movie, for me, the most relatable character. Yeah. Because she's the I have two friends who hate each other.
We all have friends who
hate each other.
Yeah.
They just don't.
Yeah, we can relate to her dealing with...
She's the diplomatic friend that wants.
And how does she deal with that? She's like, I just want you to be happy, and she lets everybody. And
she wants them to hang out too.
Oddly, it makes everyone unhappy that she doesn't say anything and just lets them be
she
assholes.
She doesn't pick a side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then,
but she's sort of a flat arc, sort of. She's
not,
I don't think
everybody
she's
changes around her. That's a good.
She doesn't change by the end of the movie. I don't think. Yeah.
These weren't for arcs. These were just what the comedy is based around. That like their obsession. Officer Rhodes is easy. He's like follows rules to a ridiculous amount. Like the carrot. She won't let her throw the carrot on the. He's like, I can't let you do that. I can't stand it. I have problems. And all the comedy in every scene with him is based around his obsession with following rules and the laws. John Hamm is really easy. He's obsessed with sex, and he thinks he's the sexiest man alive and God's gift to women to a fault.
Right,
like the boob scene. He's like, what is George Glass
do about this? He says, can he
do this? Can he grab your boob? Yes, dude.
Yes, he can.
Right. And Melissa McCarthy has 3 of them, and they're all really great. And that is, she loves animals to an extreme degree. She talks about the dolphin moment, and then the puppies. So like, there's 3 moments of comedy based around her like obsession with animals, and then she is like hypersexualized to a comic degree. She thinks she's like sexy, but in a strong way, right?
She owns her own sexuality,
exactly,
more than anyone else in the movie,
in a way that is awesome.
Yeah.
And then her third wing is she wants to physically dominate everyone, and like she's like, for the bachelorette party, let's do the Fight Club. Let's just take her and beat the shit out of her.
Right.
And then she talks about beating the shit out of her brother. And when she's with the marshal, it's all about her physical dominance. And then even in that heart-to-heart with Annie,
right,
she's like, I'll fight you. So there's
she's pushing her down on the
yeah, exactly. So a lot of her comedy is based around physical dominance. And then Rita is even really fucking funny. The mother, she's got 2 obsessions: is my children are monsters, and all the comedy is based around that.
Yep.
And then finding ways to party like she's a single mother, right? Like as if she doesn't have kids. And all the comedy is based on both of those things.
She's almost nostalgic for the days before.
Yes,
you know
exactly.
What I mean? She's very nostalgic,
so
right?
if you use that mindset with creating these characters, that works really well. You know, it really comes down to that for each one of these characters. Like, they picked like 3 things that they're like blindly obsessed with, and they based all the comedy for each character around those things. I think it tracked really well with this movie.
That's really cool.
Yeah. McKee sometimes it's good stuff.
Now I'm gonna have to do that with all the comedy.
With every comedy you watch.
The one that he went over was Frasier. Frasier's really easy to track with that. Frasier and Niles, and Daphne is obsessed with the fact that she's psychic and all the comedy around. I mean,
right.
In every episode, it's the same for them. It's really easy to track. And Ted Danson in Cheers is obsessed with. He thinks he's like a celebrity baseball star, but he's a has-been. But he approaches like every situation like I'm the man, I'm a celebrity, you know. But it's just something that I wasn't sure if this movie was gonna do it, and it totally did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's great.
I got nothing else.
I mean, it's pretty straight. I mean, like I feel like I don't know.
It's a pretty straight. You guys. It was really illuminating to me to think about this as a commentary on romantic comedies. Like I hadn't.
I think the movie's, for better or worse, way smarter than even like its fame has given it. credit for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I want
That's
to.
what-
I want to rewatch it now
Like,
that I'm like. This
I
is
implore
like.
anyone that's listening to rewatch it with that lens because
It was
works.
nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah.
For the
Yeah.
original screenplay. Funny enough, do you know what won?
No.
That's
No.
because nobody does. Midnight in Paris, a Woody Allen, a lesser Woody
Really?
Allen movie.
I like that movie, but
Yeah. Come on, who remembers that over Bridesmaids?
Yeah,
no,
obviously
not
not.
at all.
And the other strange thing about the two writers, they never really did anything.
They're
else.
writing something now.
Are they?
They're-
Good.
Yeah, they got according to IMDb, they've got it's something Del Mar.
Okay.
It's like Rose and Bar go to Del Mar. I forget, but thankfully, I think the
Rosenberg got
go to Del Mar. I think that's the name of it. But
I like it.
I think what is it? Anne Mumolo.
Annie
She
Mumolo.
wrote Joy. Was
She did. She got a story credit on it, which probably means she was an early writer on it.
Well, and I know this is weird to say, and not maybe as much to do with writing, but this almost seems like a passion project in a weird way for the two of them.
yeah.
They obviously, I think this probably mimics something that happened between the two of them in their real life.
Yeah, I never really thought about it.
Yeah,
like that,
and it's kind of like they almost had that one and done type of mentality for a while. Like,
Yeah.
wow, we did it.
we did it.
The
It
world
was a
loved
huge
it.
success.
I feel
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they said everything they wanted to say with
Yeah.
one really great movie, and maybe they're not rushing into the second
Yeah.
one as fast. So
Yeah.
good.
Good.
I mean,
Quality,
this movie's gonna have legs.
definitely.
I think, yeah, and I think people will still be talking about it in 20, 30 years.
I mean, it's been 7 years. We're talking about it.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at a lot of the comedies to figure out which one would be, kind of a pure comedy to talk about.
I think a
And
lot
this
of people would think this was a weird choice, but it's
No,
not.
it's right.
It's
I,
not.
yeah.
I think the ones you could think in the last 15 years, The Hangover would be probably an
Yeah,
okay
Hangover
choice.
would be a good one. Yeah,
They're the crazier ones like Anchorman, that
Yeah.
might fall into
that's
some,
where I would be like, do we need to talk about that script?
Yeah, it's more about the gags.
But then again, to open that up to the Judd Apatow universe, like I would argue that the reason Anchorman 2 is not, it's really funny,
It's a
but
good
it's
point.
not a good movie in any way.
It's just about the gags.
It's
The
just the
gags.
gags, and that's why it doesn't work.
Right.
Like it's got some great, hilarious stuff in it. I would argue the same with Zoolander 2. It's got some great gags in
Gags.
it, but the first one still they were movies.
Yeah.
There was arcs.
Yeah.
There was payoffs. They weren't just
It was
a
tighter.
spoof.
Even if you go
Yes.
to something as ridiculous as Airplane,
Right.
it did, because it was spoofing something
That still
very
has an
specific.
emotional
It still has
relationship
a-
arc and
Yeah.
everything.
It has a core to it.
You
It
need
definitely has a
when you
through
make a
line.
movie, you need to make a movie if you want people to care.
Yeah.
It's
I'm sure most of the better Mel Brooks movies are
Yeah.
the same.
Tight. Yeah. I
yeah,
agree.
I mean, you could point to any great comedy and say, well, that would still work. It'd still be a movie.
Take out the jokes.
Yeah, if you take out
It's
the
a
jokes.
good test. It's a really good test.
Being a comedy allows you to also have maybe like production values a little bit lesser side and everything. Like Spaceballs doesn't look like Star Wars. But the story could, if you gave it better effects, could still sustain a movie.
Mhm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Yeah. It's like you just got make a movie. Don't just make what Jamie was trying to do. Even though
Be
now,
the next Farley. I would
now I
love
think-
to read that.
I would love
Farley Brothers.
Jamie, I think you should write Dumb and Dumber 3. I'd watch it.
Okay, I will. I was kind of like if there was one Farley and his brother was Kevin Smith. That's who I was trying to be.
Okay. Okay.
I still love the Farley brothers, man.
Oh yeah.
I like the Three Stooges. Sue me.
Honestly, I think the Farley brothers were kind of an early taste of Apatow style
Yeah.
in some ways.
Yeah.
They definitely had this heart. Their
Mhm.
worlds were so outrageous that sometimes the heart was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I
If you think
usually
of
think-
Kingpin or something, but
I usually also kind of think of Apatow as a weird extension of Kevin Smith. Does that make sense? Kind of like a little bit outrageous comedies with heart,
With heart.
but they're mostly
Mhm.
about the characters.
Mhm.
Just
Yeah.
a different kind of a different flavor. But anything else we got to say about Paul Feig's?
No,
Bridesmaids?
I think we said
I
it
don't think
all.
so.
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
could talk
I
about-
learned a lot.
Yeah, me
I
too.
can't believe. Yeah, I'm happy we taught Jimmy something about Bridesmaids.
Well, so comedy's just it's the one genre I think it's the hardest genre to write.
also because performance is so
I just
in that whole thing, and
it's really hard to write something that's funny without anybody reading it out loud. You know what I mean? Performing it.
It's a hard thing to sell, even though a lot of comedies do sell on spec. But for the same reason, like one person can read something and be like, "That's not funny," or,
Right.
"I don't get that." I think that's why it has to work without the jokes. Because at least if they don't get the jokes, maybe they'll kind of get the behavior and the tension and stuff.
Well, if it's not a gag movie, you need to be with the characters to laugh at anything. That's right. It's not about the joke. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Maybe don't make the movie about the jokes. Yeah. Make it about the characters.
Characters first.
Characters first, jokes second, unless you're Airplane 7 or whatever. Right. Or Scary Movie 7, which Jamie will be writing.
I will write.
Is there 6? Did they get to 6?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay.
I didn't even know there was a 5.
Yeah. Oh, there's a 5.
I think we could skip to 7 and nobody would notice.
Scary Movie 8. Yeah. All right, guys. I enjoyed talking about a comedy. I'd love to do it again someday, but
we can.
We'll see.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about more.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you. All right, bye. You have just listened to Writers Blockbusters, a screenwriting podcast featuring 2 professionals and another guy. Available only on Thundergrunt.